Hello and welcome to my favorite books of 2024 video. I went through my reading journal, and of the 160 books that I read in 2024, I marked down 24 books that I enjoyed reading the most. And since fantasy was the genre that I did read the most, it has the greatest representation in this list, coming in at 7 books. I also have 6 classics, 4 mysteries, 3 contemporary lit fic books, 2 middle grade books, 1 science fiction, and 1 nonfiction. Also, rather than doing this as a gradated tier where I have sharing my least favorites to my favorites, I decided to share how I read it through the year. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with the books that I read in January and just go through the year. Funnily enough, my favorite book of the year was in December. And so if you stay to the end of the video, you'll find out my favorite book of the year, but we are gonna go ahead and start in January. So the first book that I have to share is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is the second book in the Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies series. And in this, we follow Emily Wilde herself, who is absurdly impulsive. So she's very intelligent, but she does make these impulsive moves that you often kind of wonder about how well thought out they are. We also have Wendell Brambleby in this. Wendell is the sunshine to her grumpy. So we see them getting to know each other in the first book, and in this book we just continue in the building of their friendship. The thing that I like about Heather Fawcett's writing is she's very good at writing about settings, specifically I think cold settings. And so I just love her descriptions. I love the character arc of Emily and Wendell. Emily really takes a leadership role, and yet she continues to find herself needing Wendell's support. And so there's sort of this shared equality of leading, but also needing support and help. And they both help each other in really beautiful ways. And I also love that the Fae world has this juxtaposition of how Fae used to really be seen, which are really terrifying and cruel, but the more modern view of Fae is more of, think of like the Sarah J. Maas with attractive Fae. And Heather Fawcett has really combined the Fae world to be both of those, and I just find it really intriguing. I will say you should read this series in order. Her third book is coming out, I believe, in February, and I am all set I have it pre-ordered because I love this series so much. My next favorite of the year was Dune. Tiffany Russell, who's here on YouTube and also on Instagram, hosted a read-along on her YouTube channel of reading Dune. And it's so thick and slightly intimidating, so I just really appreciated her efforts of having discussions so that I could get different perspectives as I read Dune. So this is a sweeping saga. This chunker is a small, tiny part of the Dune world. This is the first book written by Frank Herbert. His son has continued the series on. There is this whole cult following of Dune. Obviously the movies have been coming out, but in this we follow the Duke of Atreides and his partner, Lady Jessica. Lady Jessica is a Bene Gesserit, which is sort of this mystical female society. And Lady Jessica and the Duke, have a son named Paul Atreides. It turns out that the Atreides family has been chosen to go to Arrakis to continue to mine and export a specific spice. This spice is used for mystical purposes and is sort of seen as this valuable drug. The current group of people who are ruling the Arrakis planet are the Harkonnens, and so there is this political division between different families who are being told to run this planet. There are also the Fremen, who are the native peoples of the land. They're the ones that are being tasked with mining. They're really kind of seen as not as valuable as these noble families. This book is full of political drama, as well as an examination of religion and how religion can impact a society. There's really nothing else that I could compare it to I will say I did listen to this on audio. I read some of it, but then also listened. And I listened to a version where they had a cast of characters. And some people don't like that, but I found it very helpful because there are a lot of characters. And so when you have different people speaking, it helps you to kind of separate them and understand the differences within who's speaking and when. And I just really enjoyed that. So the next book that I have to share is the one nonfiction that was on my favorites list. And this is such a niche book choice, but I wanted to share it because I did enjoy it so much. And that is The Everglades River of Glass. And this is by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. This was written in 1947, right around the time that the Everglades became a national park. As you can see, it is very dense. This is a call to nature conservation. This gives the history of the South Florida area around and amongst the Everglades. It shares about the ecosystem changes. I mean, it really starts well before we had any sort of European invasion in that area. I learned so much about this area, and we actually were in the Everglades when I picked this up. It is something that I do love to do, which is immerse myself in specific regions that I am visiting. If you have any interest in South Florida or even just conservationism and how ecosystems are formed and how humans can change them in irrevocable ways, then I would recommend picking this up and just giving it a try. Also in that South Florida vein, we went down to Key West and visited the Hemingway house, and I picked up a couple Hemingway novels. I hadn't read anything that he wrote since high school, and one of them I absolutely hated. But The Old Man and the Sea, which is this slim little novel, I really enjoyed. So in this, we follow Santiago. Santiago lives in a very small fishing community, and he is an older man, and he is unlucky. He has not gotten a fish in almost 90 days and almost 3 months. And in his community, that is really indicative of luck, not so much skill. There is a little boy in his life who comes and visits him, but he, because he's unlucky, has really been ostracized, and he is now fishing alone. So he goes out in his skiff. He's going to try again, and he ends up hooking the largest marlin he's ever seen, ever. It's enormous. He can't pull it in. And so we spend about 3 days in this boat with him while he is with this fishing line, holding on to it with his fingers and ending up with, physical ailments because of it. He is hanging on to this marlin because he knows that with the way his community has been looking at him, that he needs to get this marlin in, but he cannot get, it's bigger than his little skiff. And so we are with him for those 3 days, and it's very enlightening. It is, in my opinion, an expose on aging and aging in community and what that looks like. It also, I think, examines the relationship between the elderly and the youth and how important that is with teaching the youth and with supporting the elderly. And it's really slim, but it packs a punch. Next, I've got A Tempest of Tea by Hafsah Faizal. This is the first book in a duology. The second book, I believe, is coming out in the autumn of 2025. This is at its heart a heist novel. So I've seen it being compared to a lot of different books. I sometimes think that the marketing blurbs can sometimes miscategorize books, or in people's minds they think it's something, and then because they have those expectations, they're disappointed. This is a heist novel. There are vampires in it, but it's not really a huge part of the plot where it's a vampire book. It is not. They are just part of this world. This book is about Arthi. Arthi owns Spindrift, which is a basically tea shop that at night has this speakeasy feel where they end up selling blood to vampires, and it's done under the table, and she's having to pay out different people so that she's able to run this business at night without any prying eyes. And she's an orphan, and her entire life is this tea shop. She has a basically partner whose name is Jin, and he also has his own sort of family issues. So he and Arthie are really a team, but they're not romantically involved. They're more like brother and sister. Spindrift ends up on a short list for potentially being closed unless Arthie makes a deal that she will go into this museum of sorts and steals specific artifacts. And so she and Jin kind of build up a team of people to be able to get in and get out. This includes Flick, who is a very well-connected, wealthy young girl whose family also has really kind of kicked her out of their lives. And so again, it's very found family feeling. They also pull in Mateo, who's a vampire, and Leith, who really seems politically connected, and that makes it kind of questionable on whether he should be involved in this heist because he might be telling the powers of be about this heist, but he's also been pulled into it. It does end on a huge cliffhanger, so I'm really excited to get into the second book and see kind of how Faizal resolves all of this. So the first middle grade so far that I have to share is A Walk in Wolf Wood by Mary Stewart. This is a tale of fantasy and magic. This is the same Mary Stewart who wrote The Little Broomstick, of which there is a Studio Ghibli Mary and the Witch's Broom. So this is a English family who are on vacation, and they are in the Black Forest in Germany. And they end up stopping. The parents set up like this picnic and they fall asleep. Well, while the parents are asleep, the brother and sister see this strangely dressed man who ends up kind of in their view walking off quickly, and so they end up following him. And by following him, they kind of get pulled into this time warp where they end up in medieval Germany. There is a mystery that they need to help someone solve. There absolutely is wolves in the woods, and they have to go in and basically infiltrate a castle to uncover and solve and help someone who is in need. It was perfect for the spring season in which I read it. Another perfect book for spring is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I got this beautiful copy in the literary book club. They had these sprayed edges, and that was what made me decide to go ahead and try the subscription for a bit. I somehow had never seen the movie, nor had I ever read the book. And I love Elizabeth von Arnim's writing so very much. I'm actually planning on reading more of her works in 2025. I just loved her writing so much. So in this, we follow four women in the 1920s: Rose Arbuthnot, Lottie Wilkins, Lady Carolyn Dester, and Mrs. Fisher. And while two of these ladies sort of know each other, they don't know each other well, and they don't know the other two women. And so Lottie and Rose decide that they are going to rent a villa on the coast in Italy. They need two more people to kind of help defray the costs, and they end up with Lady Carolyn Dester and Mrs. Fisher also. And they all sort of arrive separately. They're scoping out which rooms they want. You have the description of this villa on the coast, and each of these women come with their own issues. And we unpack them and really get into the gritty rawness of life with these women. I love the role that plants play in this as far as what is blooming when, and it kind of lets you know where they are in the world and where in their month in Italy they are. It really is a perfect spring read. Another perfect spring read is The Spell Shop by Sara Beth Durst. You've probably heard me go on and on about this. In this, we follow Kiela. She is a librarian. She's also curmudgeonly, sort of like Emily Wilde is, very introverted. And she works at a great library, which is like this big system of libraries in a city. There are books of alchemy and grimoires and books of all different kinds of magic. The city ends up under attack and on fire. And so she ends up basically packing up a whole bunch of books, getting them onto a boat. She brings her sentient plant Kaz along with her. He can talk. He's like, I don't know, this like annoying sidekick morality compass character. And they end up going back to the island that she grew up on, that her parents raised her on. Her parents are not there anymore, but their cottage is. Kayla moves right in, and she runs into people in the town like Laren, who is he's a seahorse wrangler, and she opens up a jam shop, and she cannot let anyone know that she has stolen all these books. She's worried that, you know, this is going to get her into trouble. And she also discovers that all of that magic that was kept in the city had actually been sort of pilfered from all of these outer islands. And because these outer islands don't have that amount of magic anymore, it's affecting the environment. The seahorses, for instance, are having trouble with breeding. And there's all kinds of issues because of magic being taken from these islands, almost like a tax. It really was sort of the light bulb moment of how much I love cozy fantasy. This, while there is some intensity, it just really feels cozy. It's like you're just kind of following Kayla and her life, and you're seeing this lovely island and the people within it and the community, and it just is lovely. There is romance in here. I would not consider it spicy, but there is like discussion of attraction and all of that, and jealousy. But again, nothing that I would really say is inappropriate. It's just a warm, cozy hug of a book. Another book that I read in the spring was The Harvester by Jean Stratton Porter. She wrote The Girl of the Limberlost, Freckles, very well known for those books. I have read most of her works at this point, but I fell in love with The Harvester. In this, we follow David Langston. He is sort of this like medicine man where he goes and collects plants. There's so much in here about nature and about the holistic purposes of plants and how they can heal if they're used in the right way. And he goes out and collects these plants. He also has this very unique idea of using the woods as a place to farm these kinds of plants and harvest them, but in a way that doesn't damage nature. It's just so beautiful how Jean Stratton Porter interweaves that environmental consciousness and awareness of tinctures and how we can be healed by plants throughout this book. So, but David's on his own seeking a wife. He's lost his parents. He does have neighbors. He's got a doctor he's friends with, and then there's Granny Morland, who is possibly my favorite character. She's just so ornery and funny. But he wants a wife. He's lonely. And one night he has a vision of this dark-haired beauty in the moonlight, and he is totally smitten and completely focused on finding her. The first part of the book is about his search for her, and the second part of the book is how once he does find her, she is tangled up in all kinds of family issues, and he needs to support her and be patient and wait for her. And it just is a beautiful example of courting, I think, and just such an old-timey feel, wholesome book, and I loved it so much. Another middle grade book that I loved was Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.K. Steadman. I don't see a lot of people talking about Skandar on BookTube. If you have someone who is a middle grade reader who also loves magic and kind of this concept of like a unicorn rider school and people kind of boarding there, and then so much intensity. Like, this is so plot driven. Every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. So if you have somebody who's not the biggest reader, if you find the audio version of this, they are going to be hooked. A.K. Steadman just finished the fourth book in this series. We are expecting one more. My kids have said that this and The Keepers of the Lost City are the two most intense series they've read, and they love both of them. So in this, we follow Skandar, who lives on the mainland, and he and his sister Kenna want nothing more than to be chosen to go to this unicorn riding school. But there are so many protocols and rules in place, and it ends up that they are not able to test to go to this unicorn school. But Skandar gets a knock in the middle of the night from someone who is with a unicorn, who lets him know that they figured out how to get him onto the island and into the school. And rather than kind of thinking through like, this is not following the protocol, he goes for it. He leaves his sister and his dad and goes to this island, and manages to bond with a unicorn, which is, no matter how you've gotten into the island, if you bond with a unicorn, you are automatically chosen. But through that bonding, Skandar ends up with this really big secret. And so He ends up with a group of friends who do find out his secret, and they figure out how to support him in it. There is a villain, very terrible villain, in this that is wreaking havoc on the wild unicorns, on the tame unicorns, on the environment of the island and the mainland. And Skandar, this really does follow those fantasy middle grade tropes. He is the one, the chosen one, who is going to have to save everyone. For the Cozy Reader Book Club, we read Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry. This was actually a reread for me. When you recommend a book for a book club, especially one that you've read, you think, oh, I hope this is a good choice. I hope I haven't missed anything. And it stood up to the test of a reread. In this, we follow Hannah Coulter through the Great Depression and World War II. There's really nothing that's hugely plot-driven about this. It's not intense and super exciting. It's a very quiet, powerful novel. I love Wendell Berry's storytelling abilities. You really do feel like that this could be a memoir written by someone named Hannah Coulter, who, by the way, I would love to have been friends with. I would love to go and visit Hannah and sit on her front porch and just listen to her stories. I will say it is the third in his Port Williams series. I don't think that you need to read them in order. I didn't really feel like you needed to. I read Frenchman's Creek by Daphne Du Maurier over the summer. It is a perfect summer read. In this, we follow Donna, who is this dissatisfied wife, and she basically tells her husband, hey, you have property over in Cornwall along the coast. I'm taking the kids and we're gonna leave. I'm tired of this life that we have in the city. She does have a lot of freedom. You learn that she kind of goes out and gallivants around without her husband, and he's fine with it. But we don't really kind of get an inkling that there's anything scandalous going on. She just likes an exciting life. So she takes the kids to Cornwall. When she gets to her husband's property, she kind of gets the feeling that there's been some things going on that hasn't really been notified to her husband. Like, it seems like somebody's been in her house and living in her house, and she basically discovers that there is a pirate who is living on his ship down the bottom of the cliff down at the coast. She strikes up a friendship with this pirate, and I don't want to give too much away. I will say it is a little bit scandalous as far as what happens and her kind of dissatisfaction in marriage, and it's scandalous. And I'm not usually fond of books like that, but I loved Donna's descent into sort of shrugging off the societal expectations of her as a wife and a mother. And she just goes all in on this. If you haven't read it, it's not huge. It's a perfect summer read, so give it a try. Next, I've got Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. This is by Satoshi Yagisawa. Our main character ends up losing her job, her relationship. She's got nothing else to lose, and she's just so traumatized. She moves to live above her uncle's bookshop. This is a very thin book. I wouldn't say it's a quick read, but it is not hugely thick. The first half of the book is our main character really kind of healing from the trauma and discovering that she actually does love books, and she's discovering the community of all of these other bookshops that are in this area that she's in with her uncle. And so it's like her sort of learning about herself and what she wants. And then the second half of the book, she works with the uncle whose wife has mysteriously left him, and then randomly shows back up again. And so we kind of go through the healing process of the uncle and his wife, and what has happened to his wife and their marriage and all of that. And I just really loved sort of the bookshop setting and all of the different characters and the community. I loved learning about the uncle's wife's healing process and the role, again, of having family support in that. It's just a beautiful little book. The last book of the summer that I finished and loved was Aragon by Christopher Paolini. I had not read this, and so we listened to this as a family, as an audio book, and loved it so much. So I don't have this as a middle grade. I actually have this as categorized as fantasy. This is not, in my opinion, a middle grade book. There is a lot of violence, and there are also a lot of high fantasy elements, and I think the language really lends itself to a older level of comprehension, but still a phenomenal fantasy book. And this is a series that we want to continue. So in this, we follow Aragon. Aragon is a young boy who is living with a family. He doesn't have really family of his own in this like village that's on the other side of the mountain. So there's not a lot of people that come there. There's like, you have to travel to get there. And there's a lot of superstition and kind of negativity. And you just don't get the sense that it's like the most, healthy growing town there is. And Aragon finds an egg. And rather than telling people, because again, he's living in this like superstitious town, he takes the egg to a private place, and lo and behold, it turns out to be a dragon egg, and Saphira is hatched. And Saphira and Aragon bond. They are able to have a telepathic relationship where they can talk to each other within their heads. And from this point forward, Aragon has now targeted himself. Evil people end up finding out, and he ends up having to leave. He ends up with a mentor named Brom, who is just such a phenomenal character. He comes across other people as he goes along, Murtagh, a whole bunch of different people, and they're basically trying to figure out how to live in this world with this evil king Galbatonix. Dragon riders are not supposed to be happening organically like they once were, and so now we've got Aragon, who is a dragon rider with Saphira, and it's just causing all kinds of turmoil. This is a huge series. This is the only first book in it, but we loved it so much, and we are planning on continuing. So now we're into the last quarter of the year, and I really enjoyed, as a beginning of my fall reads, Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood. And I actually got the arc of this, read it, and loved it so much that I purchased the Waterstones edition. In this, we follow Belladonna Blackthorn. She is a witch. She's born into a family of witches. And she discovers when she turns 30 that she is in jeopardy of losing her witch powers because she really hasn't used them. She works in a bookshop. She does little things like makes a cup of tea using her magic, but nothing that is like really like changing the world. And the witches have a conscience in this world where you're really supposed to be using your magic for a purpose and not just letting it languish. And she's really let it languish. And so she gets a letter, kind of like Hogwarts style, that gets delivered and that tells her that she's got to come and meet with the Council of Witches to kind of justify what it is that she's been doing with magic to them to determine if she can keep it. She had no idea that this was ever a possibility that she could lose it. And she really realizes that this is part of her identity. And maybe she has kind of not been using her magic to the best of her ability, and maybe should make a change. Originally, again, I chose this as an ARC option because the cover looked beautiful, and I think it's really touted as a cozy fantasy. This, I don't think, is cozy fantasy. It starts out pretty cozy as you're seeing her like in the bookshop and living in an apartment with her friend, and she's got sort of this beautiful little life, and it feels cozy. But then once she meets with the council, well, even before then, as she's on her way to try to get in to meet with the council, it gets intense really fast. And so this is not a cozy fantasy. In addition to Belladonna, we also have Rune. Rune is the guy who delivers the letter. He's, sort of this charming guy. You really can't tell for a long time if he has much substance to him. She also meets Artorias, who becomes her mentor, her trainer, to kind of teach her how to use magic in a responsible way. And it turns out he's got a mystery. There is a smidgen of spice in this. I wouldn't say it's like open door or anything super intense, but there is a spot in there where I was like, oh, okay, and then just kind of moved on. I also read A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This was not my first T. Kingfisher, and it certainly will not be my last. This is different than the last T. Kingfisher that I read, however. This is fairy tale retelling-esque. And in this, we follow Cordelia and her mother, Evangeline. Her mother is a really nasty person. She's so terrible to Cordelia. And so you absolutely want to look up the trigger warnings in this. T. Kingfisher is not a gentle writer by any means. She really gets into the rawness of life. And so there is gaslighting and emotional abuse, some neglect going on, just, a lot of terrible parenting on the part of Evangeline. But it turns out that they need to move, and they end up moving into a manor of a well-to-do family because Evangeline really wants to get her hooks into getting a husband either for herself or Cordelia, because Cordelia is encroaching upon an age that would be appropriate for marriage. Cordelia does have a horse named Falada, who she loves. She tells him everything. He has tried to help her escape, but anytime she gets close enough to being able to escape, her mother just seems to know and to show up. Once they get to the manor, Cordelia comes into contact with more people than she really has before. She's been refused and not allowed friendships, but she meets Hester. Hester is the main reason why I love this book so much. Hester is 50 years old. She has like a bum knee, but she has a great intuition and really starts to see that there's something odd going on with Cordelia. I love this very much. I will say, you do want to look up trigger warnings, or if you want, you can leave me a message below and I can let you know kind of what to look out for. I think how this unfolds and Hester's involvement in it and Falada's involvement in it is so interesting. And again, T. Kingfisher is just not an author where you can say, well, it's like something else. Even though this is fairy tale retelling, it is unlike any fairy tale retelling I've ever read. For the Cozy Reader Book Club, another choice that we read this year that I absolutely loved was The Woman in White by Willkie Collins. This classic novel follows Walter Hartwright. One night he is out walking sort of on the outskirts of London, and he comes across this woman in this gauzy white outfit. And she says some kind of odd things to him. I mean, it's odd that she's out there at night anyway, a woman who's unchaperoned, and she goes on her way. He ends up being invited to be an artist in residence at a well-to-do manor for a well-to-do family, and he meets Marion Halcombe and Laura Fairley. That changes his life forever. And we end up following Marion and Laura and Walter as well as they proceed through life. There is a character in here named Count Fosco who is like such a villain, so terrible, and I loved him so much. I was so intrigued by his interactions with the other characters that I began researching the connection between The Women in White and Bram Stoker's Dracula, and there absolutely is a connection, so intriguing. But this book is phenomenal. I would even say that if you're not a big classic reader, you still should try to give this a go. This really cemented Willkie Collins as being one of my favorite authors. Next, I read Air by Sabaa Tahir. I got the ARC for this and loved it so much. And it ended up being in a fairy loot box with this beautiful sprayed edges. I would say that this is honestly the 5th book in the Ember and Ashes series. The way that it was marketed said it was 20 years after the end of Ember and Ashes, and that you could start reading this series. If you are not interested in past events, you absolutely could start here. It does spoil what happens in Ember and the Ashes, but there's nothing that happens in those first 4 books that's like imperative that you know that back history before you start here. Sabaa Tahir is such a skilled writer. I love her ability to make you love characters to only then really understand their morally grayness and their humanness and their faults, because you really do kind of get attached, and you're like, oh, that person made a decision that really is not a good decision. So she just has such a way with that, of taking your love of a character and really warping it to like realizing that you still kind of like them, but you probably shouldn't. It's very intense. I love the character arc and development and the plot that she has going in this. I think this is just going to be a duology, but just a fun, amazingly well-written fantasy story. All right, next I have By the Pricking of My Thumbs by Agatha Christie. I think I posted about this on Instagram, but this is a Tommy and Tuppence mystery, and I have not read any Tommy and Tuppence mysteries, and so this is like, I think, her last one. So I didn't find that I was missing out by not reading the other ones, but I don't know, maybe some purists would really say, no, you need to read them in order, but I did not. I found this beautiful copy in a used bookstore and decided to read it in October, and I love Tommy and Tuppence. I do not consider Agatha Christie mysteries to be cozy mysteries at all. They're typically violent and disturbing and, not warm and cozy. But I felt like while there is disturbing violence in this, I felt like of all the ones that I've read, this Tommy and Tuppence one was the most cozy. Again, it's not like super cozy, but it felt a little bit more cozy than any of the other Agatha Christie's that I have read. So in this, we follow obviously Tommy and Tuppence. Tommy goes off. He's like not part of it in the first half of it, but Tuppence meets this elderly woman at Sunrise Ridge, a assisted living facility for the elderly, and then this woman's like mysteriously gone the next time she goes, and so she ends up seeing a painting that reminds her of something she's seen in her childhood, and she kind of connects it with this woman. And so while Tommy's gone, Tuppence decides to go and explore and see if she can find this house that was in this painting, and lo and behold, she finds it and ends up uncovering this huge mystery that occurred decades before. Tommy and Tuppence are older in this, which I think is also part of the reason why I loved it so much, is I can just relate to like them as characters. Second half of the book, Tommy has to go and try to figure out what in the world happened to Tuppence because they can't find Tuppence. So it really is a lovely fall read. You've got cemetery and like sketchy things happening in the cemetery. You've got smuggler's house. You've got this mystery house that she's going to try to find, and she's like describing the lay of the land and being on a train and like trying to find the exact angle of the house that was in the painting to try to uncover it. And so if you haven't read A Tommy and Tuppence, maybe give this one a try. Next, I read Sipsworth by Simon Van Booy. In this, we follow Helen Cartwright and Sipsworth. Sipsworth is a mouse that Helen finds one fateful night. There are some other characters. We've got Cecil, the hardware store owner. Later on, we have Jamal. But it's really just Helen and her inner monologue, and Sipsworth is part of it too. I will say this book's writing structure is so intriguing. You're just left, I feel like, with more questions than answers when you finish the book. But it's just such an intriguing story and so uniquely written that I found it so enjoyable that it made the list. I also read Fire in the Thatch by ECR Lorac. This is the 26th book in the Inspector MacDonald mystery. Again, I'm not reading it in order. I had a very good friend of mine recommend it to me. She was like, it's in our library system. You should check it out. And I have fallen in love with ECR Lorac. I am hoping to read more of her works as I continue on as a reader. And in this, we follow a colonel who has this land lease where he has a house with a thatched roof that he can lease out to someone. He chooses to lease it to Nick Vaughn, who is a vet with some kind of health issues a little bit, but he is so hardworking. He has been raised to know and understand hard work, and he takes on the cottage and all of the surrounding farmlands and really has really great ideas for progress and how to improve the kitchen and improve different parts of it. There was some disagreement where somebody else wanted to lease the house and they weren't able to. Well, there ends up being a murder. I don't think there is any way that someone could figure out who did it through the clues. ECR Lorac was holding on to some information that she did not share. You started to get clues, but you didn't understand why. So maybe you can figure out who, but you don't see the connection on where's the why in this. Something else that ECR Lorac does that I find intriguing is the character who ends up being murdered is so well liked. I liked this character so much. I was just destroyed when I was like, wait, that's the person who dies, this person that I'm attached to, and I think is so marvelous. I think when you compare ECR Lorac to other golden mystery writers, oftentimes it's an unlikable character. Not in this book. In this book, you're like, oh man, that's what happens. And the unlikable people are the ones mostly who are left. So I finally started The Unexpected Mrs. Polifax by Dorothy Gillman. I have heard people talk about it. I managed to get a hold of this copy and I was like, oh, I'm going to try it. It's so slim. I honestly did not have really high expectations, and man, really unexpected. I love this book so much. I cannot wait to read more Mrs. Polifax. I think people do kind of compare her to Miss Marple because she's older, but I don't find Mrs. Pollifax to really be like Mrs. Marple. They are both older, yes. But Mrs. Pollifax, man, she ends up going to the doctor for her checkup, and she's just really feeling out of sorts. And the doctor's like, well, what else is it that you want to do in life? And she was like, everything. So she writes a letter to the CIA and says she's willing to be a spy. Somehow she ends up getting called into the office, and through a series of misunderstandings, Carstairs, who is, you know, basically running the programs at the CIA, ends up hiring Mrs. Pollifax for a job. He thinks she's someone else. She gets hired for this job. He's like, she's perfect. She doesn't even look like a spy. So she ends up going to Mexico, and from that point, everything unravels in such a unique way. So you can tell that it's written in the 60s based on the politics and who kind of the enemies are and what's going on and how people are described. But she befriends everybody, even captors and evil people. And then the end, the way she orchestrates everything and manages to make it through. I loved it so very much. And like I said, I cannot wait to read the next one. It's on hold at the library. I just have to go pick it up. And then I jumped into Book of the Month subscription for The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ally Carter. I could not find it at Barnes & Noble, and the shipping was like really long period of time. They actually told me at Barnes & Noble that HarperCollins did not realize this would be as popular as it was, and so they did not get enough published for the first run. And so I was like, I'm not going to mess around. Book of the Month has it. I paid $5 and it's here quickly. I really enjoyed this. I don't think I've read any Ally Carter, but in this we follow Maggie. Maggie is an author. She seems like she's a pretty successful author, but she has zero self-confidence. She came out of a terrible relationship with her husband. She was betrayed by a friend. She's been gaslit most of her life, and she's just really struggling. She gets an invitation by her favorite author, Eleanor Ashley, to come to Eleanor's English manor for the Christmas holidays. And it turns out that her arch nemesis, Ethan Wyatt, also got an invitation. So they show up, and Eleanor Ashley's family is there, and they're like, who are these people? It turns out that there's a huge snowstorm, so we've got that locked in manor murder mystery, and Eleanor Ashley goes missing. There's people being shot at, there's people being poisoned. There's obviously attempted murders happening even after Eleanor Ashley's missing. Nobody knows where she is. But I really enjoyed the relationship between Ethan and Maggie. I loved the arc of her developing into her self-confidence. I loved that there was no spice in this. Even though there is, it's like a murder mystery romance, which I know is weird, but anyway, I loved it. It was so fun. Perfect for the Christmas season where you've got this murder mystery, but it wasn't super gory, set at Christmas. But there's obviously kind of this puzzle that Maggie and Ethan need to kind of figure out. I will say, I had an inkling from the beginning what the murder would be related to. I just didn't know who or how it would unfold. So there is something that gets revealed at the beginning where you're like, oh, I bet that's really at the root of what's going on here. And it turns out it was. So it's not like this huge twist like there was in Fire in the Thatch. But it was great. I loved it. And I will probably reread this at Christmas season. I managed to read what I would consider my favorite book of the year in December, and that is Welcome to the Hunam Dong Bookshop by Hwang Boreum. This is a translated novel. It is considered in South Korea to be healing fiction. My understanding is it's much more popular in the United States than in South Korea because it really dives into bucking the societal norms of doing really well in school, doing really well in college, and getting a very well-paying career job. The main characters in this book have all left what society thinks that they should be doing. I loved this even more than the days at the Morisaki bookshop, this bookshop story was absolutely healing fiction. So in this, we have Yeonjun, who has opened up the bookshop. She is running it. We definitely get into what decisions she has made in her life to get there. And she has hired a barista named Minjun, who also has made some really hard decisions to get to the place where he's just a barista in a bookshop. There's a lot of discussion about coffee and coffee beans and choosing them and how to get the right flavors. There's a lot of discussion about running a bookshop and the social media requirements and getting authors in and how to question authors about their books. There are characters that just come in and stay in the bookshop. We've got somebody who, again, has left what society really thinks she should be doing, and she just literally like knits and crochets in the bookshop. You've got a young man whose mother is really pushing him, and he's come to the bookshop to spend time with them and to figure out what it is that he wants out of life. It's just really a slice of life. You really feel like you're part of this community, and you really see how people have made decisions of not doing what everyone else seems to think they should, but being so burnt out and in pain and rejected that they've sort of inwardly reverted into coming into this bookshop. So I have not seen, I don't think, a lot of talk about this, but if you have the chance to get it from the library or even listen to the audio version, I would recommend it. It's just such a soft, quiet book that deals with some pretty heavy topics in such a gentle way, and I loved it so very much. So thanks so much for watching. Please, if you made it this far, thank you. Please feel free to leave down below what books it is that you loved to read in 2024. If you've read any of the ones that I've shared and you have feelings about that, I would love to hear that as well. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.